Hello, brothers and sisters in Christ, family in Christ, the household of God. I want to welcome you back to your new community, and I hope that you can, with increasing connection and just feeling it as your reality, that your new community and Trinity Grace Church is your family, your household in Christ. And of course, we're connected to the Church of Jesus Christ across the world and through all history, and even the church to come. And of course, we'll be part of that wonderful multitude when Christ once and for all returns to finalize his kingdom. And so indeed, this past Sunday, as we continue through Ephesians, we dwelt on the notion that we have a new identity in Jesus Christ as his church. He gives us, and maybe a bit more nuanced and accurately, we're redeemed. Our identity is redeemed and restored in Christ to what God has meant it to be. And I did my best to draw out, even through some technical glitches, 3 ways that Christ restores our true identity in him. And we looked at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 to 22. And I got us to think about stories as we started out. Here's a list of, at least from one website and other websites I cross-referencing to have very similar lists, the top 20 most selling books of all time, excluding the Bible. And there's something about story that really connects with us as human beings. It helps us to find identity, to find some role and purpose as we see our lives through stories. Stories even help explain our real-life, everyday stories. And on that note, it's no surprise that the Bible itself is the most selling, the number one, undisputed, most published and selling book, and hopefully not just sold, but given away as well through history. Because, we shouldn't be surprised, it gives us the one truest, greatest story that makes the most sense of our condition in this life, why life is so difficult and broken, explaining sin and where all that came from. But even before that, why there's a hope in our hearts for something greater, for something more beautiful and true than what we experience in the day-to-day. And of course, God brings all that to a head in his gospel. The gospel story in Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ, by Jesus Christ, and by his Spirit, to reconnect us, reconcile us to the Father, is the story that all our hearts truly are longing for. And so my prayer for all of us was, and still is, Lord, teach me more about my communal identity as your church in Christ. Our identity as human beings, for starters, and then most importantly as Christ followers, as children of God, is not just individual. It's not just personal salvation. God saves his church, the church of Jesus Christ, all the saints who truly placed faith in Jesus from past, present, future. And so very much real part of our identity is communal. And that really speaks practically to need to value and fight for our church unity, starting in our smaller experience of church, from our Christian households to our local churches, and then church at large, through our city, the nation, the world. We should be one. We should be fighting for this oneness and trying to think through how do we really build into that and build that up. So this past Sunday, I wanted to show you and encourage you and maybe give you just a reference point of how you can have a solid identity. And this is first and foremost for the believer, but certainly for those still investigating Christian faith, this is something to aspire to I hope that is attractive to you to want to be a part of Jesus Christ. So I know my identity is solid when, first, my identity is declared by God, not derived by my desires. Certainly in this day and age, what is prevalent is deriving your sense of identity from looking deep within yourself, identifying your desires, your feelings, your wishes, your wants, and then from there saying, therefore, this is who I am. But no, that's trying to derive your identity from within your own desires. But the truest identity is when we let God declare God define us and to declare who we are in Christ. So I want to invite you to read verse 19, and here are some questions that I hope are helpful for discussion. What's the significance of Paul saying to the Ephesians, so then you are? Okay, so then you are. What is Paul doing there, and how is that supposed to apply to our identity? I've already been unpacking it a little bit, but here's another follow-up thought and question. Our cultural values deriving our identity, our culture values deriving our identity from our desires. How is this antithetical to our Christian faith? Yet, we don't want to just become judgmental and just quickly just keep the world at arm's length. Yet, how can we compassionately bridge the gospel to where people are at when it comes to searching for identity? This is an important question for the Christ follower to wrestle with because we're called to reach out. We're called to be a witness, and we're called to go to especially those that are most different from us and that we don't naturally want to love. Next, I know my identity is solid when my identity is not my past. And especially if you call yourself a Christ follower, I hope that you really take this to heart, because one of the saddest things for me as a pastor is to see someone who calls himself a Christ follower, but they still have so many shackles of their past, whether it's past guilt, past shame, past wounds, past old thinking, whatever maybe that is just shackling you, and you're not experiencing all the benefits, all the goodness of God's grace that is afforded to you and made available to you in Christ. Okay? So we're still on verse 19, and in verse 19, Paul declares, so then you are no longer. And so that no longer, that's a timestamp. That's supposed to be a time reference point, and it points us to something they were in the past, and now, as Christ has intervened in their lives, from that moment forward, they're supposed to be someone new in Christ. Okay, we are not defined by our past. So I want to let's encourage one another, and I want you to think about a story from your past or from your walk with Christ about how the gospel has redefined you, you and your past. Okay, I hope certainly it might involve recounting a little bit of hurt, a little bit of brokenness from the past, but I hope that there is the redeemed chapter to that story where you can share about how Christ has certainly redefined you and made you new in Him. Okay, so encourage one another with your own stories, especially recount your story of how God redeemed you from being and feeling alien to God and others, because that's what Paul specifically describes for the Ephesians, that they are no longer strangers and aliens to God and His promises. Okay, so recount your story of how God redeemed you from being and feeling alien to God and others, and how the gospel has made you more whole by bringing you closer to God and others. Okay, and then finally, we know, biblically speaking, through the gospel lens, that our identity is solid when my identity is to belong to God. I love the Heidelberg Catechism. I believe it's question 1. What is our hope in life and death? That we are not our own, but belong to God in this life and the next. That is one of the greatest confidences and rights of a Christ follower, of a child of God in Christ. Okay, your identity is to belong to God. So read the whole passage over again and pay special attention to the 3 powerful metaphors that Paul uses to describe the Ephesian Christ followers. Okay, so what are those 3 metaphors? And spend some time unpacking the implications and really mystical beauties. It really is a wonderful mystery, just how God makes us real for the Christian. And so unpack the implications and the mystical beauties of each metaphor and the realities that they point to for the Christ follower. And then take some time, hopefully you can identify which metaphor especially encourages you and why. Related, how can remembering our identity through these lenses of these metaphors, these gospel metaphors, strengthen us through the ups and downs of this life? Well, I hope that's helpful for you to have a meaningful conversation, discussion with your group, and to go deeper into the knowledge and experience of God's grace to you in Christ. Have a wonderful time praying for you. Bye.